May the 4th be with you. Welcome back to the Capes and Tights podcast right here on capesandtights.com. I'm your host, Justin Soderberg. Guess what? We have another Star Wars episode for you this week for Star Wars Week at Capes and Tights. This episode features editor extraordinaire Heather Antos, who edited a number of books back in the day from Marvel, Star Wars books like Lando, Star Wars, Darth Vader, Shattered Empire, Princess Leia, Chewbacca, Vader Down, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin, Poe Dameron, Han Solo, and much more, as well as now edits over at IDW Star Trek and has done things over, or he also has an original series coming out called Catfight. She's editing, and she also has done Bloodstained Teeth, Time Before Time, Old Dog, Starsigns, and Terrorwar, amongst many other things. So Heather's talked about editing comic books, the Star Wars universe, the Star Trek universe, and so much more right here on episode 105 for Star Wars Week, or May the 4th be with you. Enjoy this episode, everybody. Thank you. Welcome to the podcast, Heather.
Hey.
Good morning, I guess, right? I mean,
yeah, good morning. I have my coffee. I made sure I made sure I got up early and was like, I have to go get my coffee before this, and we're all set. So you have your cool coffee cup.
Yeah, this is actually a gift. I work full-time as well as a creative director for a brewery.
Oh,
And
cool.
Prior to that, I worked as the general manager, so I ran the restaurant part. And this was given to me by a regular because they knew I like Star Wars, and so they gave this to me for my birthday. So I when I do Star Wars themed episodes, I tend to use this as a thank you to them. But
is this a Star Wars themed episode?
Yes, it is.
Oh, wow.
We're going to talk Star Wars, but we're also going to talk other stuff too. So don't worry about that. But I do think you also have, obviously you work on the other Stars projects too. So I want to get into that.
Yeah.
But yeah. So Heather, you're an editor. I had Daniel Chauvin on recently to talk about editing comic books over at Dark Horse. So we can talk a little bit about editing comic books as well. But I kind of want to know about Heather. Like, how did you get into comic books as a collector or a reader, and then how did you like break into the industry on actually working in the industry?
Yeah, it's actually really funny that you mentioned as a collector, because I wouldn't call myself a collector. I'm definitely not. I'm definitely more when it comes, I don't like stuff. I think that's the easiest way, which is funny as I just moved, and it was a perfect excuse to get rid of stuff, quote unquote, right? Yes. But I don't really like collect. I only hang on to either books I've worked on or books that like I genuinely like mean something to me. Whereas like my best friend will drop 10 grand on like, this is the first time Batman is mentioned in a comic, let alone appears, right? So very different mentalities. Not for me, that level. I don't know. It's collecting is weird, but to those who do, that's awesome. We need you. We appreciate you. But yeah, I was always just an avid reader growing up. I definitely was a proud member of the Pizza Hut reading book club back in the day, to all my 90s kids out there. And you know, I always say, like, I drew comics before I really knew what comics were. I would always write and draw my own stories, and my siblings and I would like argue over the Sunday morning comic strips in the newspapers. And so it was always just kind of like really around me. I didn't have a local comic shop growing up. I grew up in a really small town where when you were bored, you went to Walmart to hang out. So shout out to the Midwest. Well,
I live in Maine. It's very similar in that sense too. Like we used to, like, high school, we used to drive downtown, park our cars downtown, and just lean on our cars and hang out. So I understand not having a place to go.
Oh my gosh. That's funny. Yeah. So I never I wasn't reading Spider-Man from a very early age. My first like dip into superheroes was definitely the Adam West Ward Batman, television show. That's my Batman. That's what I grew up on. The Michael Keaton, Tim Burton, films, watched all of those. And as the Marvel stuff came out, I was always surrounded by nerd culture, like Star Wars, Indiana Jones, James Bond. With my dad shared that stuff with me growing up. So, but it wasn't until college that I really discovered, like, I guess, what comics really could be. I took an American literature course, and in it they had a segment on graphic novels where, like, we studied a lot of, like, Neil Gaiman was in there, Sandman, and I discovered, like, classic Vertigo, Transmetropolitan, Y the Last Man, Hellblazer, all of that stuff, and really, really, really got into that. And around that time is when the New 52 was happening. And say what you will about those books, I know there's a lot of controversy on how they were received, but it was a really good, it served its purpose. It was a great jumping on point for those of us who felt intimidated by superhero comics. It came out around the same time that, the Marvel movies were really making their mark out there, and announcement of the new DCU, all of that stuff. So I started picking up Batman, and it was really Green Lantern that got me into superhero comics specifically. They announced the 2011 Ryan Reynolds film, and again, say what you will about that film, for whatever reason, I was like, I want to know more about this character because I want to be prepared when I see this movie. And so I picked up the two comics that the film said it was going to be based on, Secret Origin and Emerald Dawn. I've read them cover to cover, absolutely loved them, started picking up everything Jeff Johns was putting out at the time. One of the most, I would say, defining runs on Green Lantern is what Jeff did. And then I went and saw the movie and was terribly disappointed with the rest of us. From the opening scene, I was in the theater, they should have done this, nah. So got my nerd cred right away. And I was trying to figure out, I was around early 20s at that time, and I was trying to figure out, what I want to do with my life like everyone else. And a good friend of mine said to me, well, you like comics, why don't you just do that? Right? As if you can just go to the comic shop and pick a job off the comic tree, and be set for life. But he was right. I really liked comics, and it was really interesting, and I wanted to learn more about what was out there, what opportunities there were. I liked writing, but I don't want to be a writer. It felt too unstable. I liked drawing, but, like, holy shit, drawing a comic felt like way too much work, and I am lazy. That's not true. I'm not lazy, but I don't want to.
You don't want to draw yet.
Drawing a comic, just, I still now that I even draw more as an adult, like, being told, people ask, when are you going to draw a comic, and I just, absolutely not. Like, that just terrifies me beyond. People who draw comics are, like, true heroes. But there was this credit called editor on every book, and I knew what an editor did for, like, a traditional publisher, like your Penguins or Scholastics, right? You work with the writer, you make the story the best it can be, and quote unquote, that's it. For a comic, there's so many other parts involved. There's cover artists, there's pencilers, there's inkers, there's letters, there's colorists, there's just so many other things. And I realized that a lot of the books that I was reading at the time, the ones that I liked the most, had the same editors attached. So there was something that they were doing that resonated with me. And so I did what any good millennial would do, and I started tweeting editors. I just reached out on Twitter to any, and again, this is early 2010s, so Twitter wasn't quite the cesspool
as it is now.
that it is today. And that's how I met Jordan White, who at the time was an associate editor at Marvel. He was going to be at C2E2. This was 2014. I think I was going to be at C2E2. And I reached out to him and I was like, hey, I want to learn more about comic editing. Would you talk with me? And he agreed. And we sat down, we had a conversation, and I left that convention. This is it. This is what I want to do. It's not a matter of if, but it's just when and how. And I was already graduating college, so I wouldn't be able to get an internship at any of the major publishers. They require you to have college or get college credits, so they don't have to pay you.
Yep.
And I wasn't about to drop everything and just move to New York City or Portland on the hopes that maybe, right, I'll get hired. So I decided to create my own internship, so to speak, where I would produce and create my own comics and create my own resume, basically to see like if I can do it, and more so, do I even want to do it? Do I like doing it? And I created what I still to this day, I've been working professionally for nearly 10 years, and still to this day, I call it the best title I will ever come up with. And it was Unlawful Good, an anthology of crime. And I put the call out, thinking I would get like maybe like 5 or 6 people who would want to, you know, submit to this crime anthology I was doing. And I ended up getting, I think, like over 100 submissions. I whittled it down to 17 short stories where I paired writers with artists, all crime stories, produced the whole thing, gave notes and scripts, worked with artists, like, you know, solved squabbles between creatives, did the crowdfunding marketing, you know, blah, 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 all this stuff. So that 6 months later from that first conversation, I'm at New York Comic Con, and I have this 200-page anthology that I've made. And I run into Jordan like there again, and he remembered me, and he had just gotten promoted, and they had just announced that Marvel was getting the Star Wars comics, and he knew that I was a huge Star Wars fan. I think anyone who follows me on Twitter knows that. Yeah. But he asked me, like, he was like, you know, would you ever be interested in moving to New York? I said yes. 1 month later, I had an interview with Marvel, and 2 months later, I moved to New York and was working on the Star Wars comics. So that's the short story of it. But tweeting people, that's how I broke, tweeting people. Yeah.
Not as easy nowadays as it was maybe back then.
No, definitely not as easy.
It's funny you mentioned the running in and talking to people. I feel like we at working in the brewing industry, we get cold emails all the time being like, I'm a home brewer and I want to learn how to brew beer, and can I talk to you? And 90% of the time the ownership group and the head brewers are like, we don't have time for that shit. Like, we can't even think about helping other people do their stuff. We're trying to so the fact that someone took time out of their lives or time to actually have a conversation with you about it is awesome. And obviously you think you know, that C2E2 visit basically for what you're doing now. I mean, if you didn't go, you wouldn't be here.
If I didn't go, and it's not all Jordan too. I do want to shout out Scott Alley as well, who was another editor that really took time to educate me when he didn't have to, quite frankly. There was a at that same C2E2, really, again, had I not gone to that C2E2, but at that same C2E2, there's a panel that was like breaking in and staying in comics. And I think on it had like Paul Allor, Kyle Higgins, Scott Alley, and a couple other people. And you know, they go through the crowd and they ask, who here wants to be a writer? And half the people, you know, who here wants to be an artist? Half the people, who here wants to be an editor? Scott says jokingly, and I'm like in the front row and the only person that puts my hand up. And then Scott was one of the people who I had tweeted, and he remembered me. And he like on Twitter after that convention, I think like I tweeted him about something else and he was like, was that you at that, at that thing? And I was like, yeah, that was me. And he DM'd me and he's like, give me your email. I email him. He's like, send me your resume, and hopped on a call. And like, he knew he was planning, like they were going to be promoting his current assistant at that time. And he was going to be looking for, a new assistant. And so like throughout that summer, while I'm working on that anthology, like we would have like bi-weekly phone calls where like we would talk story. He would BCC me on emails where he gave story notes on script. So I got to see how he gave story notes on script, or he would send me like an artist layouts and BCC like his notes on the layouts. And like, he didn't have to do any of that. He could get in a shit ton of trouble for doing all of that. But because he did that, like, say what you will about Scott, I know there's a lot of, unfortunate circumstances and everything that happened, but like he didn't have to do that. And he's a brilliant editor. And I learned so much from his generosity in that. And that was my comic book school, was just people, for whatever, like seeing something in me that they thought was worth giving the time of day to, which I'm very cognizant of that and how privileged I was to receive that. And so I do get a lot of people who are interested in comics and editing who reach out to me. I really try and pay it forward as much as I can. That's why I like doing podcasts like these, so I can talk about it. And if you are listening and interested and breaking in, even if it's not editing, I do keep a record on my website of every single podcast appearance I've ever been on, where I talk about all sorts of these topics and varying degrees. And I want to have those resources there and available for people to, hopefully learn and be able to start their journeys as well.
Yeah, because it's not like it's as simple as just like you mentioned. I was joking in my head earlier about how you someone said just work in comics. It's like it's hard enough just to go to a comic book store and get a job at the comic book store selling the comic books, let alone in the actual industry of making them. But there's not just like this. You go to Walmart, you can just apply for a job at Walmart. You can't just like go to marvel.com and be like, okay, cool, I'm gonna apply for be an editor. Or, you have to.
I mean, you can, but
no, it's not gonna do. So there is this way of having to work your way in, and the other side of it is knowing. I mean, it was probably. I mean, obviously, I read comic books as a kid and all that stuff, but in my adult life reading comics, it was probably 2 or 3 years into actually like heavily reading comics that it even clicked in my head that there's more than just an artist and a writer in a book. Like it's one of those things that like you think about artist is kind of a misleading name because an artist is not the colorist. Sometimes it can be, but like there's a colorist, there's an inker, there's a penciler, there's a letterer. A lot of times there's a graphic designer, there's the editor. There's so many different.
There's marketing, there's sales, there's production, there's so many, there's operations, the people who like figure out, I don't know how the people who figure out like print runs or like paper stock or like all of that stuff, like that is fascinating to me. And I don't want that job. I know I would not be good at that job, but Tara, she was our head of operations, and just got promoted to co-publisher here at IDW. And like the stuff that she does and figures out is like so cool and like difficult and complex, and comics would not be happening right without those people doing those jobs. And so, yeah, even if you're like, oh, I love comics, but like I'm not a creative person in any way, shape, or form, like there's so many like non-creative focused jobs in comics that there totally is something for you.
Yes, as well as it's funny, my 2-year-old son is obsessed with Monsters University right now, and at the end of Monsters University, spoilers for anybody a movie came out years ago, there's when they roll the credits, I believe it has like first day at Monsters Inc., and then it was like showed them like working from the mailroom to the janitorial staff to the kitchen staff, all the way up to where they wanted to be, which was on the scare floor. And it reminds me of Daniel I mentioned earlier from Dark Horse, also started really low and internship to the point where now he's a senior editor, and the same thing with these people. So getting in anywhere somewhere is a better opportunity for you to actually move to the position you want to be in. If you're a janitor at the offices for IDW, you might have a better chance to get your story heard.
It's true. I always say it's not who you know, but it's who knows you, right? And that's why, like, you know, as funny as it is, I just tweeted, right, these people, by the time it came to hiring or talking about opportunities, like, they thought of me because they knew me, because I had reached out and I wasn't a crazy person, right? That's the other thing I always say, like, reach out, but don't be a psycho. So
yes. You up? Nope, done, see ya. Moving along. No, it's yeah, so just like getting in there and doing that. But like, not only did you get the opportunity to do this, but you ended up, like, it's not even like they were like, okay, you can edit this, or, you know, assistant edit, so you edit this book. It's like, okay, it's like kind of a throwaway book. Or kind of getting rid of the book. You were on Star Wars, so like you got to go, like, you got like a dream come true, I'm guessing, to also not just start editing book for a publisher like Marvel, but you got to actually edit books like Star Wars. That must have been insane.
It was, it took a long time to get over the imposter syndrome that came with that, because, like, again, like, how fast my trajectory was, you know, and it wasn't that I didn't have the skills or didn't do the work. I did. I just, you know, luck is opportunity meeting experience, right? Like, that's what it was. And my backgrounds, you know, I did grow up writing and drawing, but I also, I studied film and theater in school. And so I ran sets, I ran groups of creative people on a deadline, on a budget, right? Getting everything ready to make sure by your deadline, by the show, by, you know, everything set and ready to go. And, you know, running sets of like 20 plus people of just different egos running around. And there's a lot of similarities. And funnily enough, a lot of people in Marvel and DC Comics editorial, I don't know about some of the other publishers, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's the same, like, come from theater backgrounds. Because a lot of skills do translate. And so I did have a lot of transferable skills, but regardless, I went from like, yeah, I want to be a comics editor, to, okay, Star Wars launching at Marvel Comics, right? Like, the biggest franchise, the biggest publisher, literally the highest selling comic of the century, right? It was absolutely insane. And, like, you know, okay, and on day one, here you're on an email with John Cassaday and Jason Aaron and Mark Waid and Terry Dodson, and Alex Ross is doing these covers, and, like, you know, and I love telling this story because, like, now that I know Tom Brevoort, he's just Tom to me. Like, I don't think anything of it, but he was Tom Brevoort, right? Like, he was Tom Brevoort, and he's very dry and can come off a bit, I don't want to say abrasive, but a bit brash on Twitter sometimes. And he's Tom Brevoort. Like, he is the guy at Marvel. And I interviewed with him, and it was a phone interview, and I was so nervous I think it went so poorly that the second it was over, I like burst into tears because I was just convinced. They asked me like what one of my favorite comics or least favorite comics I was reading right now, and I said like, it was like, what's one of my favorite comics, and I said like a DC comic, and then I was like, oh no, right, like they're gonna like hate me, whatever. It was fine, but it's so funny now in retrospect that like I cried because of Tom Brevoort. Like Tom's just Tom now. But anyways, there was so much I put so much pressure on myself. You know, I didn't want to fail, I didn't want to mess it up. And one of the first jobs I had that I had like ownership over was every single Marvel comic has what they call a recap page, and it's a quick like story so far, you know, previously on, right?
Yes.
The issue. And for Star Wars, what they did for those is they did like the opening crawl originally in all of those comics. I don't think Lucasfilm lets them do that now, but at the time that's what we did. And as assistant editor, I wrote those. It was my job to write those. And like, I'm sorry, what? You want me to write
a crawl?
An opening crawl? for a Star Wars comic, like, no, I'm not qualified for this. And like, I think I took like 4 hours to write like these like 3 sentences because I was just so nervous and didn't want to screw it up. And I remember like I sent it to Lucasfilm and then they had no notes and I was so proud of it. But yeah, it was absolutely insane to get that job and work on those books. And you know, I wouldn't be where I'm at in my career today if it wasn't for, you know, that job and that opportunity. But like, just crazy, absolutely crazy to be, you know, working on Star Wars.
And it's funny too, it's like not only did Marvel get the you know, publishing back to Star Wars again, but it's some of the, like, even back in the day into current, I mean, there's still current stuff is really good too, but that era, that 2015 era of Star Wars, to me, is some of the best Star Wars comic books that have ever been created. Like, there's just the series that were out there, the covers, the art, the everything in that whole time was just like, not only did they come in strong with having Star Wars back, but like they came in strong. There was no messing around there.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Yeah. It's something, you know, not to toot my own horn, but it is something I've heard collectively, like from the fans and creators, that, you know, they miss me on those books because of just, you know, the quality of the content and just like the relationship that I had helped foster, because I, you know, that relationship between Lucasfilm and Marvel was brand new at that point. You know, the Marvel hadn't been working with Lucasfilm since the 70s, so it's, you know, all new people, yada yada yada. And like, I built that approval system. I built, you know, how the Lucasfilm communicated with Marvel and Marvel communicated with the artist in order to like run it as smoothly as possible. Because, you know, one of the number one things people ask me is like, how closely did you guys work with Lucasfilm? And the answer is very. We, you know, multiple emails every single day and phone calls, and, you know, I was very interconnected. And, you know, the way because when I trained the new assistant editor who would be taking on Star Wars after I was leaving, it switched editorial altogether because Jordan White stopped editing Star Wars when I left as well. He got moved to X-Men. I was telling the new editors on Star Wars is our job is to make the very best Marvel Star Wars comic that we can. Their job is to tell us no.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
And like, so as much as we want to work with them, and we do, and you know, obviously, like, Lucasfilm is not the enemy or anything of that, but their job is to protect the brand, protect the identity. Our job is to push it as far as it can go. And so there is going to be a little contention there, and there are going to be times where they're going to tell us no, and you have to go back and be like, you're wrong. And it's a give and take, and that's with any licensing, you know, it's with the Star Trek I do now, or, you know, Godzilla or Dungeons and Dragons or any of the other licenses that we have at IDW or that any publisher has. It is, you know, building that relationship and trust with the licensor is really, really important. And there are times where you have to tell the licensor, like, I understand where you're coming from, but you're wrong.
The readers and us fans want to push the envelope as much as you can too. It's like, you don't want the bland, safe story. Like, you want to be able to have either new characters or characters that, you know, maybe you're not allowed to touch, or you feel like you're not allowed to touch, like, but it makes the story for this makes sense for the story, yada yada yada. And so, like, yeah, pushing that and going back and forth, it makes sense to do that, because again, you get the best story possible if you have some give and take from both sides, your editorial team and Lucasfilms.
Yeah, and there's definitely times where, like, you know, and well, my job as editor is to protect my writer and to protect my artists, like, first and foremost. And like, if you are asking for unreasonable changes, you know, after something has already been approved, or like, you know, there's approval within reason, right? There's certain things where, like, this character was approved and now suddenly they're not appearing in the movie, or we're changing, like, you know, whatever altogether. And it's, you know, a week before it's supposed to get announced, the whole thing has been drawn and done, and whoops, we need to scrap the entire project. Like, there's nothing I can do about that. And you might think I'm being hyperbolic. No, I'm not. Like that shit happens all the time. Like all the time. It sucks. And there's nothing that we can do about it. But there's other times where it's like, this is the character's design. The character has been designed this way. It's a character that we created, you know, this whole time. And then now, you know, someone who has nothing to do with the comics, is not involved, sees one thing and goes like, I don't like how this thing is drawn. I don't care.
Yes.
I don't care. You know, it's just you smile and nod. A lot of times in licensing, people give notes to justify their existence and their role. And I hope none of my licensors listen to any of these podcasts I do where I say this, but I, you know, there are a lot of times where I say, okay, I hear you. We'll see what we can do. We don't change a thing. We send it back to them and they don't notice.
Yep. Well, I can understand that. I mean, I feel like as a graphic designer myself too, sometimes I put my work to someone else that's on the decision-making team. And I'm like, this, that, and the other thing. And then they'll like be like, what about this color? And it's literally just so they can say it's their.
So they had input. Yeah.
Yes. And maybe it's not. And a lot of times I've done it also many times where I've put the color that looks like crap, knowing they won't like it. So they'll tell me to change it to a color that I know looks good. So they did have input, even though I knew that the entire time. I just set it up that way.
It's a thing that, like, you know, when I'm submitting cover sketches to Lucasfilm and I don't want them to pick one, I just don't submit that sketch because I don't give them the opportunity to pick it. Like it's not rocket science, right? You know, and there was a thing, we ran into this on the Poe comic all the time, with Charles Soule and Phil Noto, that comic, and then later on Helen's Waiter when he took it over, where, like, you know, Poe got himself into some unruly situations, and, you know, like saw the backhand of a hand, you know, the backside of a hand every once in a while, and, you know, would get a little beaten up and bruised. And Lucasfilm is very particular about how you show any kind of blood or, you know, like a bruise and gore. But you get what I'm saying. They're very, very particular about that. And so when we learned that, we you know, did the South Park thing where we send in, you know, the version that is like super over the top, that we know they're gonna say, yep. And we give them options. And that's the thing for anyone who's ever interested and wants to go into doing anything with licensing. I always say, give them options, because if you just give them one option, they're more likely to say no. But if you give them 2 or 3, they're going to pick one of them. They're going to say, oh, these are my choices, right? It's a multiple choice test, right? And when you're taking a multiple choice test and you have A, B, C, D, you don't get to make up option E. That's not available to you. You have to pick one of the 4. And so we've kind of been psychologically trained to do this. So when you present your bosses or licensors or whatever options, they're never going to say, or very rarely will they ever say, none of those.
Yes. And they're very unlikely to give their own input in the sense of how it should be done. Like if you give one option to them, they may come back and try to solve the problem for you in a way that maybe that's like what you said, okay, let us do that. We'll do that. So, but if you give them 3 options, they're less likely to say, when we solve this problem, because there's 3 options for them.
They'll just say, ooh, option 2.
Yes. I like option 1, but option 2 is better, and so on and so forth. There's discussion on that. And again, if you give them the most gory thing and give them something less and something less, if you give them the most gory thing, they'll say no. Yes. They'll be like, no gore at all. But if you give them something like, okay, this is doable, right? And they can do that too. But not only is their licensors the one that when you were working with Star Wars and even Star Trek you're working with now in Godzilla, any of the licensed projects that you've worked on, which is different than something like an original creation, you have these fandoms. You've got to have some sort of a thick skin that when you're editing a book or working or writing or illustrating, these people who are writing these licensed projects like Star Wars or Star Trek, that people aren't going to like your decisions that you made as an editor or as a team, creative team.
Yeah.
And having that thick skins, what is that like? Is that just like you just deal with it? People are going to complain no matter what, or do you take any of that to heart?
I say everyone is entitled to their opinion, no matter how wrong it is. Like, I know. Look, people, you're never going to please everyone, you know? And so you either care or you don't, you know. Then that was the thing. That was a decision I had to cognizantly make very early on in my professional creative career, where it was like, either I give a shit with what people think or I don't.
Yeah.
And if I give a shit, then it's going to ruin my life. And so I just stopped.
Yes.
And that's easier said than done. But sorry, this is my job, and I have this job for a reason. I like to think I'm very good at my job. And like, you know, Star Wars, for instance, like, I am as hardcore of a Star Wars fan as they come. Again, look at my Twitter. And like, I know my shit when it comes to Star Wars, and I know what fans want and are looking for, and I try my best to give them that. I know what I would want as a fan. And again, with licensing, at the end of the day, it's not my property. I don't make all the decisions or calls or whatever, but you know, I just posted about this a couple weeks ago, like Thrawn, like literally day one at Marvel, I was pushing for Thrawn comics because I knew the Star Wars, you know, and an Old Republic, which I still haven't done, but like those are the ones, because I knew those are the ones that the fans wanted. But yeah, you're never, especially with like these franchises that have gone on 40, 50, 60 years, you're never going to please everyone, and everyone has their own opinions and headcanons, right? Of what, it's why so many people were pissed off about Last Jedi, right? It's, well, Luke didn't live out the headcanon that X amount percent of fandom had built for themselves of what quote unquote should have happened. And you know, like that's your headcanon isn't reality. Sorry. I hate to break it to you. That's not reality.
I also hate to say it because it sounds weird, but Star Wars wasn't made for you. It's made for the greater people. So like, it always seems like when someone, it feels like you're speaking to me personally when you're a fan of something like this, Star Wars, Star Trek, Turtles, anything like that. But it's so funny because we just mentioned I'm in a book club every month. We read a graphic novel or a trade paperback at my local comic book shop, and we just finished House of M, and we were talking about the next month, and this being May, we were like, oh, let's do Star Wars. It makes sense. May the 4th, all this other stuff. And like half the group were like, screw Star Wars. They screwed it all up with the continuity and all this canon and all this other stuff. And I'm just like, what are you talking about? Like, well, the books and all this, like the stuff that came out in the 80s and 90s and all that stuff. I'm like, well, you're trying to figure out, yes, like that stuff, but that doesn't mean that it has to, that's Star Wars legacy now. And they've changed some things, but it's for the, I mean, if you also take the story itself, like I know there's a bigger world to a whole thing, but like the 2015 Darth Vader series was amazing.
Thank you.
Forget the rest of it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, in the sense that you're reading 5 issues of something, love what it is, and not like it's so, the connectivity from far about years ago and all this other stuff. Like,
it's so bizarre. It is always, it's just such a fascinating thing of human psychology, and I want someone to do like a study on this, how people personify their identities based on these fandoms in a way that they get so riled up about these fictional timelines and canons, and then don't care about reality. It's such a weird, you know, like, because it's like, I don't mean to, like, you know, disrespect anyone's love of a fandom, because that's not what it is at all. But like, it's fake. You know?
Well, that's the funny thing is we were having this argument in it because I was talking about how the reason I love Marvel so much is the fact that, you know, Stan Lee, Steve Ditko, all these people back in the day created this universe that's based in real world. Like it's New York City. Like that was one of the big things growing up. Like as a kid, we could go to New York City and like Spider-Man could be flinging around on webs. Like there's no such thing as Gotham. Like there isn't a Gotham. So that's one of the reasons why I disconnected with that. But like, they're like, it's fake. It's still fake, Justin. And I'm like, I know, but like, it's not like when you're living in your, why I love independent comic books so much right now is because it's like the horror comic books are like real world with small deviation to it.
Yeah.
And I want to be able to believe that this could be real. It's the movie Paranormal Activity. Like most of that movie, you're like, oh my God, this could be an actual like, you know, security camera footage movie until the end where I feel like they ruined it. But like the want to feel like this is real. And so I understand immersing themselves into it, but in the same sense, it is fake. Like this is not a real world. Like this is a made up story.
And also like everything's canon till it isn't.
Yes.
You know, like that's just everything is canon till it isn't.
The benefit I see that you were able to do with the Star Wars books and Marvel and IDW when IDW had it and Dark Horse now is it is cool to have a universe that you can read the High Republic books right now and the comic books. And then we're going to get some TV shows that really, you know, movies that all connect. It's cool in that sense. But any of those people who are Marvel fans know that the MCU is one thing and the comic books are another thing. They technically are in the same like world, they're same people, but like they modify things for like
it's the multiverse. It's the multiverse, Justin.
But like, why can't we have that? Like, I don't know. I just feel like it hasn't deviated enough for me to complain that Star Wars is that much different than what you had back in the 70s. I don't know. It's one of those things that I can't imagine being that hard up about a Dynamite story in the first place. Like, I don't even care if it was never connected. You could do a Darth Vader story that has nothing to do with anything else, and I'd be happy to read Darth Vader. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's
I'll get off my soapbox.
No, it is a really interesting thing. And, you know, I just have to trust my gut and like what I'm doing. And look, at the end of the day, some people just want to be pissed off and they want to hate it. And people watch things, read things now to not like it specifically. Sorry.
Well, it's also the modern technology. It's modern social media. We talked about yesterday about something else too, but is that there was this ability to complain about it. You know, in 1977, going to see Star Wars, and like you had your friends and family to complain about it with. Like there wasn't like this wide. I could just say screw Star Wars on Twitter and get some and then tag you in it. That was another thing that Daniel from Dark Horse was mentioning. He was like, the number of people who hate something that happened and tag the creator in it directly. Like it's it's like, this sucks, you know, at Charles Soule. And it's like, why would you do that? That's so mean.
I just say thank you for buying the comic. Thank you for supporting it.
And then they repeat back to you that they bought it, they downloaded it illegal on the internet. And then you're like, well, screw you.
Yeah, I don't.
You have no say. No, but it's just weird. It's that world we live in that people have the ability to, which is great because guess what? No one may ever admit it, but there's a possibility Lucasfilms is like, well, maybe we should do this a little like, you know what I mean? Like, so keep saying your opinions, whether they're wrong or right. Like, voice your opinions on things. But I don't know. I just think there's too many people who will die on the hill who never buy a Star Wars comic book again because they read, you know, Lando from 2015 and it wasn't exactly what they wanted it to be and what they pictured what their Lando book would be in. And if you want a Lando book to be that way, write it yourself. That's what I say. And then submit it and see what happens. No, but now you went from Star Wars. Have you been a Star Trek fan your life too, or is this something newer? So you have been a Star Trek fan. Okay.
I have, yeah. So I wasn't as like, I grew up watching TNG, and so that is when I think of Star Trek, I think of TNG, and you know, when they tried to revamp with like the J.J. Abrams movies, I know again a lot of controversy about whether or not that's Star Trek. Neither here nor there. I think they did, you know, whether or not you liked them, you cannot deny that they kind of reinvigorated the franchise. Without those films, we would not have Strange New Worlds, Discovery. Like we wouldn't have, you know, any Picard. Like we wouldn't have those shows today. So But I definitely wasn't as hardcore of a Star Trek fan. But I definitely was a casual fan. I liked it a lot. And then obviously getting a job working on Star Wars professionally, the last 7 years of my life were hardcore Star Wars. To the point where I can translate Arabesh, right, just on site, just because like that was my job, so switching over to Star Trek, that has been like so distant in my mind, was really intimidating. It's so Disney, long story short, Disney pulled the license from us. So it wasn't, there wasn't any like controversial reason as to why. They were just, oh, it's the pandemic and we lost $1 billion, so we don't want to renegotiate with you and come up with a reasonable fee. We just want to sell it for twice as much to someone else. That's what happened. It's just Disney looking for a quick buck, right? And my boss had asked me, he's like, so what franchise, like what else are we doing? Because there were some other editorial shifts happening at the time where all the licensed books were moving around a bit. He's like, what would you be interested in? And the only other license really that IDW had that really interested me and I thought I saw potential with was Star Trek. But it was intimidating because going into Star Wars, like I knew Star Wars, I knew it. I could do it in my sleep, but Star Trek is fascinating in that you have all these different series like TOS, Voyager, Enterprise, Deep Space Nine, and you can be the most hardcore Voyager fan and never have watched any of the other series. And you don't get that with Star Wars. You might get people who have only watched the movies and never read the comics or the books, but they've watched all the movies, right? And Star Trek, you get people that Deep Space Nine or bust or TNG, like they just will not touch or acknowledge any of the other series. And every single one of those series almost has its own canon. Every single one of the Star Trek series is like its own Skywalker saga in a way. So it's very intimidating. But the thing that really intrigued me about Star Trek was it's really the first shared universe that we have, as nerds, as geeks, and it never has really, I think, reached its potential in comics. Every single time, at least in modern comics, I looked at what Star Trek had done in comics in the last, 10 or so years, and it was every single series kind of existed within a vacuum and never really took advantage of what a line of comics could be, right? They didn't exist within the same world. They didn't exist within the same space. Every series was just a novel done in comic form, right? And so I saw a real opportunity to let's just see what, if I approach Star Trek in the same way that we approach Star Wars when Marvel got Star Wars, where, we have ongoing series that exist at the same time, that interweave, we can do an event, and then you have mini series that, aren't required reading, but do connect and further develop in a way. It's like you said, like walking in New York City, Spider-Man can show up at any time, right? In an X-Men book, Spider-Man can show up at any time. And affect the story and vice versa and all of that stuff. And Star Trek comics had never done that. And so that's really what I wanted to do with the line. And, we launched with the Star Trek #1 in October of 2022. And we just launched Defiant, which is the sister series to the ongoings, the two ongoings going on at the same time. And we're about to do the first ever Star Trek summer event this summer called Day of Blood, that I'm so excited. And it's been received so well. We're getting talent interested in working on Star Trek that in comics that have never before. And the weirdest thing, and it's good, but it's just so strange, as everyone in comics always talks about attrition, sales going down, down, and that's why you get all these relaunches, right? Star Trek 5 went up from 4, 6 went up from 5, 7 went up from 6, 8 went up. Like, that doesn't happen.
No.
That doesn't happen
No.
for one issue, let alone 3 issues in a row. That just doesn't happen. And so whatever it is that we're doing is like resonating with people, and it's so surreal and weird and humbling, and just like, I just hope we can keep doing it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny how you mentioned that, because I when I first started going to my LCS a couple of years ago, he didn't carry, like, no one asked for Star Wars or Star Trek comic books. Like, there was just like, we're in a small town in Maine, and people just didn't want it. Like, they didn't care much about it. And now he has people coming in like, wait, you don't want to start? So like, now he's having to add it to his regular list of ordering comic books because of the fact that people are doing it. And I think some of it has to do with the fact that it's, like you mentioned, the TV shows. Some of that stuff, those are absolutely
Star Trek has never been better. It's never been bigger and better in the zeitgeist, and being able to tap into that at the same time, and like having this support, right? Like, we did the Lower Decks comics with Ryan North and Chris Fenolio, and having Mike McMahon, who's the creator of Lower Decks, be such a vocal supporter of the comics and what we're doing online, like, that only helps, obviously, right? And it's so cool. It's so cool to have, like, we recently on Star Trek number 6, we had to consult with the producers behind Prodigy, to make sure everything is in line, and it's stuff like that the fans want and notice. They want to be able to, fans love an Easter egg, right? And they want to be able to, like, oh, that thing connects with that thing I just watched, and I feel smart because I noticed, right? And it feels current, and it feels like it matters. I think that's the biggest thing, is it feels like it matters. Whereas if you're telling, and that was the tricky thing with Star Wars when we were doing the Star Wars comics, because those launched between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, and like, everyone knows that Luke is going to survive, like his life is never at stake. So how do we make those stories interesting and feel like they matter? And that's the tricky thing, again, with Star Trek comics, is if we know these characters survive, if we know, then it's not about whether life or death is at stake. It's how are they changing? How is their life impacting? Or how are we further informing the next chapter that we see on screen? And so really diving in and understanding the material is important for that.
And I also think that, like, it's so many projects are being launched on streaming networks and TVs and movies from comic books nowadays, that it's also, you're seeing this, like, some of the characters that were created in the Star Wars books that you worked on back in 2015 are now seeing their way onto the screen, or will be soon. And that's crazy. Like, having that ability to do that in the Star Trek universe would be kind of cool too. Like, bringing in characters into the comic books that eventually someday, when they make a movie or a TV show, that you created a character in a book to go into that thing. I just think that, Star Trek, it's funny how Star Trek and Star Wars have always been like this, battle. If you're either a Trekkie or you're a Star Wars fan, like, there's not very many people who cross over between the two of them. And if you can build this comic book universe to be as, an impactful thing out there, people might start to notice, and they seem like they have. It seems like if you go up every issue, I think people are noticing that these books are being made pretty well.
I've even had a few retailers tell me, they're just like, we're selling more Star Trek than Star Wars right now. And that to me is like the big, like, oh, I beat myself almost, right? Like, but no, it's really humbling. It's really cool, because this was, really changing how Star Trek comics were done, and using, talent that hasn't been seen on Star Trek comics before. And I also have to, like, shout out the folks at CBS and Paramount, like, for also, like, supporting the not weird, but just the different direction, visually and narratively, that we're doing with the comics, because, like, Christian Ward, whom I love and adore as an artist, his psychedelic style is a bit out there for what Star Trek has previously done visually, and getting him on covers, and having them respond so positively, And, every pitch, I have this really, really cool project I'm so excited about, that will be announced soon, that's coming out this fall, that, I just keep waiting for them to say no, basically. I keep, like, how far can I push them? How far, like, what's the thing that they're going to say no to? And they haven't yet. And it's really cool to have that sort of trust and partnership with a licensor to like really trust and believe, where we want to take the franchise. And so just huge shout out to them. And then just shout out to, Jackson Lanzig, Colin Kelly, Chris Cantwell, Angel Zoida, and Ramon Rosales of the, Star Trek and Defiant books, who like are just really bringing their A game. And I think their passion for these characters and stories like really shows. And it's just cool. It's really cool to be a part of. And, some days it's not that I just sit back and be like, aha, I do nothing, it's all them. But like, it is really fun to just sit back and like see these people just do their best work.
Well, when you have a good team, it's like, I mentioned that to Daniel, who's also an editor over at Dark Horse, and I mentioned that to the person who took over for me in the restaurant part as the general manager, was like, if you put a good team below you, it makes your job easier. That's the whole point of having good people below you. So if you have a good writing team and a good artist team and so on and so forth, then you're not like, your job gets a lot easier. If you have a team that's hard to work with or not very good at their jobs, then you're gonna have to step in a lot more. So I mean, it's, having a good team below you makes it easier to manage a project for sure.
100%. Well, that's the trick of any, being a good leader, being a good manager, being a good boss is hiring the right people. It's not micromanaging.
No,
it's hiring the right people. And that was me when I stepped onto Star Trek. Was I knew that I'm not the Star Trek encyclopedia that I was for Star Wars. I know that, and I'm not going to pretend to be that. I know that's what my people at Paramount are for. They're gonna, that's literally their job, is to tell me what can and cannot happen. But then my job is to hire the right people that know these characters and know this world better than anyone else. And then my job is to just make sure it makes sense to the casual fan and that the story is good. That is my job. And so that's, with Chris and Jackson and Colin, like, these guys know Star Trek, like, better than anyone on the planet. And Angel and Ramon are just such huge Star Trek fans in and of themselves. So like, they know it. They know it so well. And then for me, I get to be the person who's just like, I haven't seen this episode and I can't recite this off the back of my hand, so y'all got to be a little bit more like clear on certain things. But I will say I was very proud of the day that I mentioned a Star Trek episode and character that Jackson hadn't heard of and didn't know, and I felt very smart. So,
well, I'm glad you said that, though, because of the fact that you have a team that knows their stuff, and this goes back to the whole canon versus not canon, or not liking a story or a direction that they went with something. It's like, the people that are working on these books are fans. And honestly, out of the people that are out there reading these, maybe bigger fans than you if they're writing or illustrating a book. So this is not like Joe Schmo out there who's just a random person who's like, I got hired to do Star Trek or Star Wars.
I guess I'll do it. Yeah.
These people are ones that either sought it out or people know they've been fans for a long time. Like every single person that's on that High Republic creative team, Charles and Cabin and all those guys,
they're love it.
Die-hard Star Wars fans. So it's not like they're just creating things out of their butts here and just hoping that it works. Like, this is stuff that they wanted or have thought about since they were young or kids and stuff like that. So.
And that's literally it. I mean, that is literally it. When people were asking me like, what's it like to work on Star Wars? And it's do you remember in high school when we all used to sit around the lunch table and like talk about, well, what if blah 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 did, what if Luke fought Darth Maul on the next wing and blah 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 blah. I don't know.
I like how you said high school. Dumb. I think I still do that.
Right, we still do that, but like that's our jobs now. Yeah. Like that is our jobs. And to like, I think one of the first things I did when I was working on Star Wars was I had a tabletop Star Wars RPG game that I played for 6 years with a group of people. And the first thing I did, the first opportunity I found ways to get everyone on my group become canon in some way, shape, or form. So like we're all hardcore fans of, no one out there is writing a Star Wars, a Star Trek, a Batman story just for fun.
Yes.
Like that's fun. Trust me, we don't get paid enough for it to be just fun.
Yeah. This is stuff that they want to do, and it's the same thing goes with the editorial team with you and the people working with you too. It's like you're fans of these things, so they're not gonna stick someone on a Star Trek or Star Wars book who hates the opposite. Like, right. I'm a big Star Wars fan, I hate Star Trek, because that would just ruin it, because all they would do is ruin the series for their own benefit. Like, so that's another thing to think back on is people are making these movies. Your J.J. Abrams and all those people, like those people are making these movies because they're big fans of these things too. These names are big enough that they can find the right person to do it. There's no one out there being like, no, I don't want to do that. Like Star Wars, Lucasfilm is finding people to make their films who are fans of the universe, who will do a good job for them, because that's how they make their money. So like, so that's one thing I always think about. These people creating it are not just random people. So, but everybody's entitled to their own opinion. Like you said, it could be wrong, but they're entitled to their own opinion.
Everyone is entitled to be wrong. That's fine.
But so you're working on, I'm going to finish this up here, but you're working on Star Trek as an editor. What other books are you working on over at IDW, or is that it right now?
So I'm overseeing all things Star Trek, and then I also have a originals title that comes out end of this month. Actually, it's called Catfight. I call it John Wick meets Kill Bill meets Cats. So if any of those interest you, I highly suggest checking it out. It's by Andrew Wheeler and Elias Kyriazis, I think.
Yeah,
I totally butchered he's Greek, so I there's a lot of consonants in there, and I apologize, Elias. But I highly recommend checking out. It's super, super, super fun. And then over at Image, Bloodstained Teeth Volume 2, the final collection just came out on sale, Time Before Time, by Declan Shelby and Rory McConville. We're on our final arc.
As I say, is that wrapping up? I'm pretty sure that was the wrapping up.
We just announced it ends with issue 29 will be our last issue. So three good years of that book.
Oh, it's an excellent book, yeah.
Thank you. Old Dog by Declan Shalvey is back out this month. Issue 4 comes out. And then I just launched 2 new Image books with Saladin Ahmed, Starsigns #1, which if you're into like Zodiac and astrology based superheroes, highly recommend checking that out. And then Terrorwar, also by Saladin and Dave Costa, which is kind of like a cyberpunk horror story. So that just came out. So I work.
It's a beautiful book. Like I just read that one. It's
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
It's beautiful. I read Terrorwar, and it's absolutely beautiful. Old Dog. I mean, I love Declan Shalvey, so I'll read anything from Declan Shalvey. Even though the funny thing is I fall in love with these people as the opposite of what they're doing. Like I fall in love with these people as either artists and now they're writing mostly, or the opposite. And I'm just like, oh, why do you keep doing this to me? Yes. But like we were talking, I was talking to Scotty Young on the podcast, and he was mentioning just like, there's just so much going on now that he can't write these books and illustrate it. It just doesn't have time to do all that stuff. So
it's just not possible. Yeah.
So I can understand that Declan writes well and illustrates well. So whatever he wants to do with his time, he can do that. Fine. I'll buy anything that says his name on it. So there you go. And then Heather, you have a website too?
I do. It's very out of date. I need to update it, but it's just heatherantos.com. I'm Heather Antos on Twitter. I'm Heather Antos on Instagram. It's pretty easy to find me. Should you want to, and let's talk Star Wars or Star Trek.
Star Trek. Whatever, anything that starts with their star, really, because you have Starsigns.
Starsigns. This is true. I do a lot with stars.
Editor of the stars. There you go.
There you go. That's my new tagline.
I really appreciate you coming on, talking Star Wars, Star Trek, all the stuff in between editing. Would love to have you back at some point in the future to talk more. But I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to talk to us, and hope the rest of your day and the rest of 2023 works great for you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.